So this is the A band. Now the way to remember it's called the A band is the second letter in the word dark is A, therefore the A band is the darker band. Okay, and that's where the actin and the myosin are overlapping, and we know that in the second letter in the word light is I, so the I band is the lighter band. So the A band has got the actin and myosin overlapping, and it's dark, and the second letter is A, so it's dark. Okay. Now, in the middle of an A band, you've got this area where there's just myosin. Okay. Now, we call that the H zone. So here is the H zone, and in the H zone, you've just got myosin. So you can see that because it's not as dark as where there's an overlap between the actin and myosin, but it's not as light as where there's just actin. So it's slightly darker, and that's the way to tell, because you've got to be able to work out what's going on, whether it's a drawing like this or it's an electron micrograph showing you the same thing, and you've got to be able to work out what's what. So I always say label the whole thing first, work out where everything is, and then you'll be able to work out what parts are what, okay? So if you now go to the diagram below it, which is now showing you it, rather than just showing you in terms of banding, it's now showing you that structure in terms of the actual filaments themselves. So you can now see what's going on in more detail. So again, this is the end of the sarcomere, so that's the Z line. Okay. Now this line here is just pointed to the thin filament here. So this is just actin. This is pointing just to the thick filament there. So that's the myosin. Now, obviously this bit in the middle here is the H zone. That's the A band, where there's overlap between actin and myosin, and this is obviously the I band, where there is just actin. Sometimes on some diagrams you'll see a direct line right in the middle of the sarcomere. It's not on every diagram though, and we call it the M line, and that indicates the middle of the sarcomere, and the part where there's just myosin, but it's not on every diagram. Now, if you've been quite eagle-eyed, you'll notice that all the Z lines, there's a Z line here, there's a Z line here, and there's another one there. Every Z line is in the middle of an I band. So this is one sarcomere, and that's a second sarcomere. So when you're looking at the questions, always number your sarcomeres, because work out where the Z lines are first, and you can work out how many sarcomeres you've got. Because often what you'll find with these questions is, they'll say, measure the length of a sarcomere in micrometers. So it's a classic microscopy question and a magnification question, but if you don't know what a sarcomere is, you might measure the whole thing. And obviously, it's only that much of it. Yeah? So if you've printed this off turnover, again, another variation of the same diagram, but now it's showing you in terms of the actual bundle here. So inside, in terms of inside the muscle cell, okay? Now, if we have a look, what you've now got, if you wanted to pause the video and see if you can label this on your own now we've looked at it twice, try. If you don't, it doesn't matter. I'll go through it with you. But if you want to, pause it now, and then you can see if you can give it a go on your own. Okay, so if you're still with us and you've thought, well, I've tried it. If not, don't worry. So remember, this one here now is just one sarcomere, okay? Now, on this one, obviously, it's got jagged lines rather than straight lines. It doesn't matter. The reason why they're called Z lines is because they look like they're actually zigzagged like that, so they look like Zs. So you can see that these are actually Z lines. So this here is the sarcomere. Now, remember, what we said is, okay, so the sarcomere is there. Now, here, this darker bit where there's overlap, we call that the A band, where there's actin and there's myosin. Well, remember, in the middle of the A band, where there is just myosin, that's the H zone, in the middle. Some diagrams have this. Right down the middle, there's a central line, which is called the M line. Now here, these are I bands here, which is just actin. So there's an I band here, and another one here. And this is pointing at this darker, thicker filament, which is just myosin, and there is actin. That's the actin filament there, okay? Now, interestingly, if you have a look at these dots here underneath, what you've got is showing you there on the myofibril. Now, you'll see that this, obviously, is a longitudinal section. So it's like if you took a mitochondrion, and we know mitochondrion look like that, and if we want to look inside it longitudinally, you'll see that they look like that. But what happens if you turn them the other way around and looked at them transversely? They look like that, wouldn't they? They wouldn't look anything like they look longitudinally. And that's what this is showing you now. So rather than being longitudinal, we've now turned it round transverse and cut it that way. So you can actually see now, rather than seeing across the filaments, you're seeing just into them. And you can see what this shows you is this, okay? This bit here, they've cut just through the H zone. So we know that in the H zone is just myosin, okay? So you can see here, these filaments are thicker. And you can see there are just myosin filaments and there are lots of thick myosin filaments. But here, where they've cut through transverse, on this one, you've got an overlap because this is in the A band. So you've got actin and myosin together in the A band. So you can see you've got the thicker myosin filaments and then the thinner actin filaments. So you've got this bit here, which is where you've got both sets of filaments present. So you've got a different structural arrangement here than you do here. And that's important when we look at the sliding filament theory, because what happens is the filament, the actual actin filaments slide over the myosin filaments and the sarcomere shortens. And depending on where you cut, you can see different things. And that's how they show it. Now, underneath here, you've got then what each of the structures within a sarcomere actually are. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you the details so you know what they are. If you want to write these down, if you haven't printed this off, do. If you have, then that's great. Okay, so the I band, remember, we know the I band is the light band, because the second letter in light is I, and we know that they are the light band containing just actin filaments. Okay, well, we know the A band is the darker band. The second letter in dark is A, and that's the dark band. And because it's the darkest one, you'll see that contains actin and myosin filaments. The H zone is a band lighter than the I band, but darker than the A band. Contains myosin only. The Z lines are darker lines in the middle of the I band represents the end of a sarcomere. The M line, remember, that it's not on every diagram, but that is the middle of a sarcomere where myosin filaments